author, global speaker, and venture capitalist, all threaded in the DNA of a single entrepreneur. Good day and welcome to this edition of Entrepreneurial Edge, a series that gets behind the mind of some of the top entrepreneurs on the African continent and in Dubai. They'll take us along on their entrepreneurial journeys, what it took to launch exceptional businesses and scale them over the years, as well as share the challenges that they were dealt with and the successes that they achieved. My name is Tania Habimana and this is Entrepreneurial Edge. My guest today is a young business leader and impact investor. As the CEO of a Pan-African investment firm, MyGrowthFund Venture Partners, he has risen fast to the top of African enterprise in little less than a decade. Vusi Thembekwayo ran his own business at a very young age, doing various jobs alongside studying for his MBA. In 2007, he began his successful career as Director of New Markets and Structured Income at Medcash, and in 2010, he turned the new business division of Medcash Group into a 461 million rand a year turnover business. Fast forward to 2014, when he starred in a reality TV series, Dragon's Den, and founded MyGrowthFund Venture Partners. Vusi became the first African to speak by invitation at the World Bank, a career-changing move that placed him on the path to become a global speaker. He was recognized in the Top 12 International Speaker Award by Meetings Net editors in 2015. Vusi was only 25 years of age when he joined the Under-30 South Africa Millionaires Group. Welcome to the show.
Hey, how are you?
Fantastic. So, Vusi, you're an accomplished businessman, many accolades behind your name. But what I'd like to know is, who is Vusi? Who was Vusi as a young boy?
Probably somebody, I think if you asked the people in my life, they would have said somebody very mischievous. I was, I think, just had restless energy, constantly looking for the next adventure, but also raised with a fair amount of discipline. I started martial arts when I was 9 or 10 years old. My dad was the sensei in the dojo. And so kind of growing up, I was a bit of a Matilda. I did martial arts, I did classical music, I played the violin, I was in the choir, I did dramatic arts, I did public speaking, I ran 100 and 200 meters as an athlete. So I just had a lot of energy and I was constantly looking for stuff to do.
And I can see that energy is still there. But tell me, did you ever imagine that you would become this person? Did you see yourself achieving this level of success?
Yes. And I know that the right thing to do right now is to come on a platform like this and go, well, no, what happened is it was a mistake. And no, that's not my journey. I remember, I think I was in like grade 5 and I was sitting next to a friend of mine, Damiano Pitriusti, who today is a doctor. And he and I were talking about like how we kind of see our lives unfolding. And I said to him, I want to be an inventor. And I'm going to build a technology company and I'm going to name it after myself. And it's going to be called VTech. And he looked at me and he was like, VTech, like the Honda. And I was like, what Honda? Because at the time I didn't know that there was a Honda called the Honda Civic VTech. But yeah, I think from early on in my life, I've always wanted more. I've always hungered for more. And I've always aspired to achieve greater than my environment sometimes told me I could achieve.
And in terms of your inspiration, your role models, did you have any?
Probably dad. I think my dad was my probably my closest role model. My father wasn't, he wasn't what you'd call rich, but he was an incredible human being. He was loved by the community. Everybody adored my dad. He was a forward thinker. He was very smart. He was articulate. He was well spoken. He was handsome. And he was incredibly disciplined. My dad had lived a very disciplined life. So dad was definitely a role model, kind of a growing up of the kind of man I wanted to be when I grew up. And as I grew older, my mom also actually became somebody I started looking to. My mom's her tenacity and her grit, her ability to keep going, even in the face of overwhelming opposition, was then and continues to be today a great source of inspiration for me.
And what do you take from them?
I think just the never say die attitude. I think the belief that tomorrow can be better if you're willing to do the work. And I remember when I was a little boy, I think I must have been about I want to say 9, maybe 10, there or thereabout. My parents had a big financial wobble, and we were on the brink of losing everything. My dad lost his car. We almost lost our home. We had to move out of our home to go and live with my grandfather, and then moved out of our grandfather's home to go and live with my aunt and uncle, my mom's sister and her husband. And it was a very difficult time. I remember this for my parents. I remember this very, very particularly. And as all things happen in life, that season came to an end. And my parents rebuilt themselves. My dad rebuilt himself, and he came back stronger than before. And I think the lesson for me out of that was and continues to be that sometimes you just have to outlive the winter. It's a part of the seasonality of life. There will be ups, there will be downs. And I think we've come out of this, COVID period, which has taught us this. The COVID period has taught us not to take anything for granted, that what you have today, you can lose at the drop of a hat. And that the true mark really of greatness and of great people is just the ability to outlive the winter. It's to out-survive the winter.
And I guess in every entrepreneurial journey, and even just life in general, we will come across winter. It's part of the seasons of life. Tell us about the most challenging winter that you've had to get through.
Oof, that's a tough one. I've had several. I think in the early stages of my business, in one of my old businesses, I had a small consulting business. We operated out of Ingwazi Office Park in Centurion, South Africa. And I remember when I opened that business, I had a bit of money saved up from when I was employed, and I went and paid, a 3 months rental up front. And I had an assistant who was doubling up as a receptionist, and I paid her 3 months up front. And my belief at the time was that, and I think all entrepreneurs do this, where you build the Excel spreadsheet, and the Excel spreadsheet extrapolates the numbers and it tells you what's going to happen in your business. And then you realize that the real world didn't get the memo about your Excel spreadsheet, so it doesn't keep to those numbers. And my model had said that at the end of 90 days, I was going to break even. I was going to be cash flow positive, even though I hadn't broken even yet. And I was like, great. So all I need is to put money forward for like 90 days, and then I should be fine. And we were doing a couple of things. I was doing like recruitment. I was doing HR consulting. And then I was also doing balanced scorecard implementation. And this is back in the day when balanced scorecard was like frontier tech. The balanced scorecard was like the thing back in this day. I'm going back about 15 years there or thereabout. And the 90-day came and ended. And at the end of the 90-day, I hadn't closed my first sale. I had no money in the bank account, and I had nothing. And I spent months actually living in the office because I then got into trouble with my bank, and the bank wanted to repossess the car. I went and had a conversation with my landlord, and I spoke to the landlord about what I was at to the business. And I said to the landlord, I'm going to give you a weekly status report of my business and what's going on. And the landlord was very, very gracious. Very gracious guy. And he was like, sure, that's fine. And every week I'd send him a detailed report. Like, these are the number of clients I've seen. This is how far we are in terms of closing these deals. This is what the cash flows look like. And he was very gracious, and he kept me there for months until the business did turn around. Our very first client I remember still that we closed was Exaro. They came on board and they gave us some work. And it was actually a recruitment mandate. And then my second client became Metro Cash and Carry. They gave us some recruitment work, and then I think it was a strategy balanced scorecard implementation. And then business really started growing from there. So I think all entrepreneurs go through a period of difficulty. For our investment firm, COVID for us was that period of difficulty. The way I kind of run our businesses is, whereas there are most people who operate in the VC space who operate purely as VCs, we'd like to own the full value chain of the VC ecosystem. So we have an accelerator business. We do a lot of corporate venture. So we partner with corporates to bring on board entrepreneurs building disruptive technologies that they can onboard into their businesses, especially on the supply chain side. So we do that. And then we've got a very strong kind of incubator platform where we help entrepreneurs with education, with training to actually scale and build their businesses. And then, of course, we've got the investment side of our business. And then we've got something called MyGrowthFund Learn. But then you've got all these other businesses that have to run off their own P&L. And when COVID hit, those other businesses were definitely affected. And we had to make some adjustments. We made some adjustments, had to right-size the business in terms of people. The biggest adjustment we had to right size and repivot the business was towards the market. And so we re-looked at which markets we were operating in, which markets we were servicing. We changed geographic focus, and we started operating in different geographies and have expanded the business into other parts of the continent, running it from Dubai. So I think, the point about it is that all of us have those challenges and those opportunities, but you learn that the winters will come. It's a given that the winters will come. What really you're looking for is to build enough grit in yourself that when the winter comes, you're able to survive it and you're able to sustain your business.
You know what I really like with what you're saying is this notion, it's almost like you let your landlord into your journey. And I think that a lot of times, especially when we're starting out as entrepreneurs, it's tempting to kind of make everything look good. You want the Instagram to be okay. You want to make sure that it looks like you're winning, like and I just really like your humility and actually letting your stakeholders, the people that are involved in your circle in a way, into your journey and being upfront and honest about where you are along that process. And what I'd like to know is, when it comes to the notion of circle, entrepreneurs, business leaders, and we speak to many, there's always almost like this inherent circle of people that they kind of walk the journey with. So who's in your circle?
It's a great question, by the way. So I kind of like broke my life down into 4 component parts. And in each of these component parts, I have people with whom I am able to reflect myself. Because I think, what drives anxiety in the world, what drives depression, although that is in many instances, if not all, clinical, but I think a lot of what drives our own poor self-perception is that we look at mirrors that are broken and trying to get a better reflection of ourselves. And so I have different kind of people in different parts of my life. So, Rabbi Mohsen for me is an incredible human being. I reflect a lot of kind of my spiritual growth and journey with him. I'm very close with the Insha founder, Satguru. And so he helps me with a lot of those kind of like spiritual growth stuff. When I've got real questions I've got to ask myself, like, am I living my life according to my purpose? And then, like Sadhguru asked me, he was like, but what is purpose? So it's this kind of stuff. And then for my own, from a family point of view, I've got people who, have been in my life for years, very quiet, subtle people whose life, by the way, in no way mirrors mine. They are ordinary people. They work ordinary jobs. They have been in the same job for 10, 15 years, but they are a steady hand, and they have done the things in terms of building their own physical and personal and family life. That for me is something that I aspire towards. And I'm like, I like that. And I want to learn from that. I also have people from whom I learn from a distance, people with whom I'm well acquainted, but I learn from a distance. I look at somebody like Ntate Monang Mohale, for instance. His relationship with his family and his wife is just inspirational. My business partner and chairman of our new firm, Habimana, his relationship with his business and how brutally honest he is with himself and with his staff and with his team, inspirational. My partner in our business in Dubai, Lorenzo, his relationship, for instance, with his investors, and in fact, jointly our investors, is inspirational. It's something I learned from. I think the golden thread for me has been authenticity wins the game. Humility keeps relationship. And so what you want to do is to be as authentic as possible. And it's about being authentic and being authentically smart. So, don't be authentic with losers, because they will leverage your authenticity to try and abuse you. So I want to be clear here. Let's not pretend that we live in a world where people don't have their own intentions or there is no malevolence in the world. So when I say authenticity wins the game, I mean being authentic with people when it matters and the people to whom it matters. People who will relate with that and reciprocate that. I could, for instance, do that thing with my landlord because he was the kind of person, the kind of character with whom I could connect. And today we still do. Today there are still people in my life with whom I will share that level of detail, that level of information. And then, as I say, the other thing is humility is really, really important. I gave my life to my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And so I'm very clear that everything I've attained and I've achieved has only been by his grace. And my life, if I'm completely honest with you, really changed when I made that submission and admission to myself. Because before that point, all successes was about Vusi. It was the guy who's, before he's 30 years old, I was on the cover of Entrepreneur magazine, still the youngest person in the continent to be on the cover of Entrepreneur magazine. And I've been featured on Forbes and this, and so, and I think when the world tells you you're great, you believe it. And you grow and you mature and you get to the point where you realize that it's actually only by the grace of your creator that you are here, that you're breathing, that you're alive, that you're still able to add value to the world. And so then the question is, what are you going to do with this gift? How are you going to leave the world a better place than you found it? So I know I've gone a long about way of kind of answering your question, but I think the main answer to your question is that I have different people to whom I reference when I look for different pots of wisdom. I have different people I reference when I look for wisdom in terms of my spiritual life, my financial life, my familial life, my physical life. All of these, I have different people to whom I reference because nobody has the whole package, but certainly people all pulled together, you can grow yourself.
Like with what I'm hearing is it's almost like you've got a board of directors, a board of advisors, where every single person has a specific role, and it certainly does sound balanced. But you mentioned something, the notion of how young you succeeded, and the fact, I mean, one thing that really stood out for me in your story is how you were one of the youngest directors of a listed company, and how was that? How was it being so young, where I can imagine everybody else in the room is maybe twice your age? How did you deal with that?
My journey started like this. I was on the platform speaking as a public speaker, and then I was opened up to opportunities that people were discussing. Because you have to remember, when they're calling a speaker, where are they calling you? They're calling you to a boardroom where they're having business discussions, which invariably means they're calling you into a sphere where capital is the influence and capital is the opportunity. And so I understood that early. I think by God's grace, I had the wisdom to see that opportunity early, and I leveraged it early, right? First with a consulting business. And then once that started going, I was like, actually, there could be some opportunities for opportunistic investments here. And the company I was a director at was one of my earliest kind of stints into kind of investing in these companies, was a company listed on the Altex, and it used to do affordable housing. And I was on the board, and I was like, I'm going to take a material interest in this business, and I'm going to help grow it, and I'm going to help scale it. And I think the point there is that you have to, when you're in the room, you have to believe that your voice has value, and that your value is not determined by your age, it's not determined by your gender, it's not determined by your race. Your value is determined by your background and the unique perspective that you bring to this conversation. So you could come into a conversation filled with people whose qualifications end with A, CA, MBA, CFA, and all of these people who are incredibly qualified. And you come into that conversation with no formal education, but still your perspective adds value because it comes from a unique background. I think if we look at an example of somebody like the deacon, the now late Jabu Mabuza, or the man who was my mentor for many years until he passed away, Don Mkwanazi. Both of them, we learned that you can come into the boardroom and not really have a formal education, but add value. And so, my journey has been, yes, I was young. And certainly when you're young, there's the propensity to overlook you, to undermine you. And so I had to learn very early on to make sure that I would, when I speak, my voice is heard, that I would stamp my authority very early. But also that I am worthy of being in this room. I'm worthy of being in this conversation. I bring value to this conversation. There is a unique point of view, a perspective that I bring to this that nobody else can bring. Once I believed that and I internalized that, I stopped walking into the room looking to apologize for my presence. I rather walked into the room looking for the seat that I should occupy so that my voice could be heard.
And what I really like about what you're saying is just this notion of, I want to say, stepping into the room like God sent you. That's what I'm hearing from you.
That's exactly it.
And Vusi, tell me, now you sit on the other side, where you're the one actually looking at other young entrepreneurs' investment opportunities. Tell us about your best investment to date.
So, most successful investments, let me think about. We've got a tech investment down in Cape Town that is a Uber, but for florists. We've got a fuel business in South Africa, where we implemented some technology. It's a fuel wholesale business, and the technology made the business incredibly efficient. It reduced wastage. We've got a carbon emissions business where we backed an entrepreneur that was importing a particular product into South Africa, beneficiating it and selling it into the fuel ecosystem. And it helps the users of hydrocarbon energy, fuel, LNGs, et cetera, reduce their emissions into the world. We've got an amazing med tech business called 3J Medical. We've got a great business that we're busy backing now called Buy My Stuff, which is like an app, but for the informal market. So there's a whole host of, I think, transactions and investments one has done that has done really, really well over the period of time. But the truth about it is they always say you don't learn from the wins, you learn from the losses. It's the losses from which you learn. It's the hard lessons from the losses. Lessons like you never skip the process and the due diligence. Never ever invest because of FOMO. Never ever invest because everybody's piling into an investment and you feel like you're missing out. It's almost always a recipe for success, a recipe for disaster. Because even if the underlying investment itself was not a bad business, often because it's FOMO, the price has been driven up and the valuation is wrong. And I always say, even to my own team, you never really know if a valuation is right until you try to exit an investment. You can keep revaluing something, especially businesses that are not listed. You can keep revaluing this thing and marking to market or whatever exercise you want to use until you're blue in the face. So you can ramp up your valuations all you want, but at the end of the day, the true value of a business or the true value of an asset is what the other person is willing to pay for it. You never really know the value until you reach the point of exit. So even the transactions that were for us, we didn't necessarily make the desired RRRs. It wasn't because the underlying investment didn't do well. Often it was because we bought at a rich valuation. We bought at a premium, and by the time the business we were looking to exit, we just couldn't get the right pricing at exit. And of course, you then get to a point where you're trying to exit the fund. You've got to liquidate the investment so you can return money to your LPs or whatever the case might be. And then you just sit in that situation where these are the things that you've got to do. Yeah.
And I know, Vusi, I know that you love this continent and that you care about Africa. What are your plans for the rest of the continent?
I'm very excited about Africa. And I tell you what excites me. So, Ghana becomes independent in 1956. And kind of between 1956 and throw forward to the early 1990s, Rwanda in 1990, South Africa 1994, thereabout, you have really the coming of age of Africa, this political freedom that Africa begins to experience and enjoy. But that political freedom has always lagged social liberties, it's always lagged financial well-being being equally distributed across the populace. What excites me about Africa now is that for the first time in a long time, Africans themselves are thinking truly and honestly about what does financial inclusion look like? What does financial liberation look like? What does an inclusive education system look like? What does inclusive healthcare look like? And to answer this question, into the breach step these 20, 30, 40-year-olds who all went to, not all, but most went to these amazing universities in other parts of the world and have come home to build home. That for me is what excites me. So you're seeing edtech startups who have an MIT qualification, who are not taking the job at that Seattle-based startup where they could be earning $100,000 a year, but rather choosing to come home to Guinea-Conakry, and this is a real example, to build an edtech business, right? Or you're seeing, GB and his mates, Munya and the team at Flutterwave, now them reaching $3 billion valuation. You've now got Paystack. And I remember 10 years ago, if you asked us, any of us working in venture capital, how many unicorns in Africa, we could count them. And I think at the time it was 2, if that. But today, there's all of these amazing businesses being built, and all of them have the same theme, and the theme is social good. So it's not fintech for fintech's sake, but you'll have a fintech business that enables remittances, which means traders on opposite ends of the border, one living in Congo, Kinshasa, and one in Congo, Brazzaville, can trade with each other and exchange money with each other without following the formative rules or the formal rules of the reserve banking system and having to wait days and get a SWIFT number and a formal bank account and all the rest of this. So you're finding these amazing innovations being built, and the rails that they're building these innovations on is the rail of financial inclusion and transformation. That, for me, is what excites me about Africa. It's young people who are actively engaged in building the future of the continent, and that should be cause for all of us to celebrate.
And I'm feeling your excitement all the way through to here. Now, Vusi, on our channel, we really speak to your high-level investors, your institutional investors, your corporate executives, CEOs. What can they do to harness the potential that the African youth and the continent has in closing?
When Smith Corona heard about this new technology called mobile telecommunications and in fact computers, the then CEO of Smith Corona, G. Lee Thompson, said that there was no ways computers were ever going to outpace the sales and volumes of typewriters. At the time, Smith Corona was the world's largest typewriter company. I mention this to say that the worst way to assess a new opportunity is to use old logic and thinking. I think the real opportunity for all of the asset consultants, they're watching this conversation, the asset managers, and the asset owners, all of the large institutional investors, the board of the trustees that are sitting on these mega pension funds, the opportunity for all of you is not only the traditional allocation into the traditional capital market system, but to begin to look at this new emerging alternative capital market system and ask yourself, what opportunity are you missing? Because as we speak, Tiger Global, the largest venture capital fund in the world, is now doing transactions in Africa. SoftBank is doing transactions in Africa. All of the large accelerators, Plug and Play, Y Combinator. I myself am backing a young man who built an artificial intelligence business called Cerebrium. He, as we speak, is in San Francisco as part of the Y Combinator cohort for this year. They're in the continent. 500 startups is in the continent. My plea then is the following. For too long, Africa has been the recipient of, rather than the driver of, its own development. We today have an opportunity to be the drivers of that development. We have the talent, we've got the skill, we have the opportunity. What we really need is the patient capital. And so I think to all the institutional investors who haven't yet made their, if you're in South Africa, Regulation 28, I think it's about 2% of your portfolio can be allocated to alternative asset classes. In other parts of the continent, it's more, in some less. But to all of these institutional investors, if you've not looked at venture, at private equity, at early stage investments, if you've not looked at these, then I would ask you to, have a conversation with somebody who can educate you about this opportunity, because amazing things are being built, and they're being built by Africans for Africans themselves. And wouldn't it be a great testament to Africa if not only the talent and technology, but also the capital was coming from Africans themselves? So yeah, that would be my closing shot.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Vusi. Thank you so much for letting us into your journey and sharing some nuggets of wisdom there. That was Vusi Thembekwayo, CEO and founder of MyGrowthFund Venture Partner. Thank you to the audience, and until next time, goodbye.